Hello again, interwebs. This is Bobby with Madness Labs. This tutorial is going to be about CSS selectors. So as you might recall, in the last course, we dove in a little bit to writing some HTML tags, and then we actually applied some styles with some basic selectors in CSS. But the rabbit hole goes much deeper. So in this video, we're going to cover a little bit about selectors and kind of what you'll see more in a real-world application rather than a simple dummy app. So this is where we last left the application. We've now got a basic amount of styling on this page. We've got some background color, we've got some font styling, stuff like that. But let's jump back over to our code. And one thing that can be very problematic when you're writing styles that are very generalized like this, like for instance the H1 or something like that, is that these styles are going to apply to every element on the page. So for instance, if further down this page I wanted to add another H1 in, and then I want, come on over please, okay. So then I want to say a new title. So, and I jump back over to the browser, I can see that H1 gets the same styles as the one at the top of the page. So this doesn't get maybe problematic here because we kind of want all of our styling to be the same, but generally in a project you have one style sheet that controls the overall aesthetic of the application. And so if you only got to be able to target the tag names, you would run out of elements to put on the page pretty quick. So CSS handles this by allowing us to make classes. So a class is just a set of styles that we can apply to a class, and then we can apply that class to an element. So let's go ahead and try that out here. So on this H1 element, maybe we want this guy to have most of the other styles from the H1, except this specific one, we want it to be blue. So we can add a class here called anything we'd like. So maybe blue title. So then over here, we can actually add a dot blue title and then give this a color of blue. So basically, when you add this attribute onto an element, and then you add these text values here, this text value corresponds with anything that's after a dot on this side. So basically, this blue title is going to apply to this element because I've added a class to it. And we can add as many classes as we want to an element. Let's just make sure it's working. So we refresh, and it is not. So why? It helps if you save your page. Awesome. So now we can see that the blue color has applied. And if I want to inspect this to verify that it's all working correctly and actually see this in action, we can see that the H1 styles are applied down here, and then this blue title class is then overriding the color rule that it was originally set by the H1 rule. So there's two reasons for that, and this is where the cascading part of cascading style sheets comes into play. So one, the class selector is more specific. So it's a more specific rule, so its rules are going to take precedence. And then two, it's also further down inside of our style document. So documents that we set at the top, rules that we set at the top are going to basically get overwritten by rules that apply to those same elements further down inside of the style sheet. So this is, again, where the cascading part comes in. And why might we need this? Why do we want to do this? Well, again, because we need classes to be able to set states on things, to be able to add even more specific stylings to a certain section. I mean, really, like on a web page, you only use a handful of tags. And so these classes are a way to point out different tags and add a little bit of extra styling just to make it suit your needs for the project. So there's another type of selector that we can use, which is a ID selector. So to make an ID on something, we do very much the same manner. Let's make a new H2 tag. Let's make another H2. and we'll say this has an ID. So in the same fashion, we can set ID equals subtitle. So to target this in CSS, we actually want to write in the same fashion, except with a # at the very beginning, and that denotates a selector for an ID. So in this case, we're going to do subtitle, and again, you'll see that this guy, that's the text value for the ID, attribute, property, whatever you want to call it, corresponds with this selector that we're writing over here. And so the only real difference between a class and an ID selector is just the fact that an ID has a little extra bonus to it, that an ID is supposed to be very specific. It's an identifier, as ID is short for. So it's supposed to identify a specific object on the screen. And I'll show you where this comes into play when we jump back to the browser. So I'm just going to write a simple color rule, make the color white. Now if I jump back over to the browser, we can see I have a new H2 with some white text in it. So you can notice that it differs from the H2 that we already wrote in the last tutorial further up in the page. So again, the difference here is kind of weird. So I'll actually show this in action. So we're going to beef up this to like 100, well, actually let's just add some more content into our page so we can really see this. So maybe I'll add another paragraph tag, and then lorem ipsum text, and maybe I want to copy that a couple times. Awesome, now we got tons of lorem ipsum text. Okay, so now we got a ton of text on the screen. So an ID can actually be targeted via the URL, and that will actually jump the page to where that item is on the page. So I can actually do #sub-title inside of my URL, and you can see that it jumps down so that that item is viewable inside of the DOM. So that's kind of the unique thing about an ID. And also an ID can only be applied, or only one ID can be applied to an element. So what that means is, unlike classes where, for instance, I could add a underline class, and note they say you shouldn't do this, but you know, I'm a rebel. I'm going to add a text decoration underline. So I can add multiple classes onto an element by simply adding a space inside of the attribute's value. But an ID, there can only be one ID for an attribute, because again, it's supposed to identify, it's a unique identifier to identify this specific element on your page. Nowadays, single page applications use the ID, use that hashtag inside of the URL a lot of times to handle routing and navigation, and not many people use that as actually a way to jump around your page. It's usually handled by JavaScript these days. However, that's just kind of the caveat, and that's kind of the use case for it. And again, generally the IDs are for giant sections of content. So for instance, if you had like a home page and then on there you had a section about you, a section that had your projects, a section that has this, you might make a div that wraps each one of those and give that an ID. So you could click around through the page and jump to those different sections. But again, styling wise, you're most likely going to be using classes more than you're going to use IDs. So let's jump back into the browser again and check this out. So now you can see that that underline is added. So we can actually inspect this guy again. Inspect element is our best friend. And basically you can see that those two different class rules are being applied to that one element. So that's a general overview about how classes work. The next tutorial we'll go over actually using frameworks, because frameworks kind of give us a really easy way to quickly scale out an application. You writing your own styles is really neat, and you know, it's definitely awesome to be able to write an entire application from the ground up with all of your own HTML tags and your own classes and selectors and all that stuff. But in reality, most developers use some set of tools to help them quickly iterate and quickly get their ideas out. And then they can kind of tweak them to their liking. So having something like Bootstrap or Ionic or Yeti or any number of these frameworks, it actually automates a lot of the work and it'll get you about 90% of the way there. And then that way you can focus on actually building your application rather than building buttons and nav bars and cards. So that's the general gist in this video. So tune in next time when we'll take a look at Bootstrap. Thanks, guys.